Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the queen of crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and boy, do I have a great interview episode for you today, listeners. Mystery author Riley Sager is on the show, a writer who has lived on the bestseller lists now for nearly a decade, and who has just come out with by far his most Agatha Christie-esque mystery. Before I go to the interview, I just want to give a spoiler warning about two major Christie titles, And Then There Were None and Murder on the Orient Express. If you have not read either of those books, just be warned that Riley and I are going to spoil the heck out of them because they figure into his novel a whole bunch. You have been warned, and now let's go to the interview. My guest today is the author Riley Sager, who made his pseudonymous debut in 2017 with the psychological thriller Final Girls. And since then, he has published a book a year, all the way through to this year's offering, 2025's With a Vengeance, a thriller that heavily references two Christie crown jewels, and which will be the focus of our discussion today. So that is 9 novels in all, and every single one of them a New York Times and global bestseller. At this point, readers have come to depend on Riley Sager to deliver a taut thriller, often with elements of horror, and usually set somewhere familiar for the genre, only for that familiarity to be stripped away by means of variously ingenious twists and turns. Here is a sampling of those familiar thriller settings from over the last 9 years. A creepy summer camp, a creepy apartment building, a haunted house. I think to call it a creepy haunted house would be redundant. A ride share gone horrifically wrong, and a home care situation for an elderly woman gone equally horrifically wrong. While many of these books incorporate events from the past, which impinge on the present, something that is very familiar to us Christie fans, for the most part, Riley's books take place in the present day. But with his latest book, he has broken that mold. With a Vengeance takes place entirely in 1954, and entirely over the course of one evening and early morning, 12 continuous hours, set somewhere a little different and not so familiar, on a train that is empty, except for a handful of passengers who are about to have a very bad ride indeed, as this night train barrels its way from Philadelphia to Chicago without stopping. I should also mention that Riley Sager is the pen name of the author Todd Ritter, who began publishing books in 2010 under his own name. Just to avoid confusion, I'm going to refer to him as Riley throughout this interview. So at this point, I'd love to say, welcome to the show, Riley.
Hey there. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
So I just want to give a non-spoilery overview of what's happening in With a Vengeance so that we can have a conversation about it. Here goes. I like to be kind to authors on this podcast, Riley, and I am going to do a summary rather than asking you to do one, even though I'm sure you are more than capable. But here's my attempt. Anna Matheson is our lead here, our main character, our protagonist, and she is a woman whose entire family, her brother, father, and mother, in that order, died as a result of a horrific incident 12 years earlier in 1942 involving a train manufactured by the Matheson family company. A lot of people died in this train accident, or incident, I should say. 37 troops, to be specific, who were all heading off to fight the good fight in the Second World War, including Anna's own brother. It was Anna's father who was blamed for the faulty engineering of the train in the aftermath of this disaster, which resulted in his going to prison, where he was eventually killed, vigilante style, as retribution for what had happened. After losing her son and husband in this way, Anna's distraught mother dies by suicide, right in front of her, I might add. So that leaves Anna, who has subsequently been given proof that not only was her father innocent, he was the victim of an elaborate scheme pinning the blame for this accident on him. There are 6 people who helped bring off this scheme, 4 men and 2 women. And Anna is determined to make each and every one of them pay, summoning them anonymously to participate in this hellish, nonstop night train trip from Philadelphia to Chicago, during which she will tell them all that they've been caught, watch them squirm, and then deliver them into the hands of the FBI once they reach Chicago. So this is a revenge trip. But of course, matters don't go according to plan, and it isn't long before one of these 6 people turns up dead. And now Anna has to figure out who done it and fight desperately for the life of everyone on this train, including her own. Would you say that is a fair summary of at least the establishing concept of your book, Riley?
That is a perfect summary of this book. And it is not easy to summarize, which I didn't realize when I was writing it. It was until I had to go on a book tour and sum it up in like a minute or two. Where I'm like, wow, there's a lot to this plot. There's so much going on here.
There is really a lot going on, and especially the incorporation of this past event from 1942. At this point, it will be obvious to most listeners that you are drawing heavily here on 2 different Christie crown jewels, and then there were none, which features guests invited anonymously to an isolated location who are then picked off one by one. This may or may not be what happens to our train passengers here in this book. It plays out a little differently, but there's a lot of, and then there were none to the concept. And also, of course, we've got Murder on the Orient Express, which uses a train car to such brilliant effect as an isolated setting, and which is also about revenge for a horrific incident in the past. I was actually doing a little bit of reading of some of that other promotion that you've done at this point for the book, and it sounds like you actually had the brilliant idea of mashing together these 2 Christie novels. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with the concept for this book.
Yeah, I came up with it in a very roundabout way. It happened in summer of 2023 when there were suddenly all these really cool train scenes in movies. There was Bullet Train and the Indiana Jones Dial of Destiny, and of course, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, which had that amazing finale set on a train. And I saw all of them in a really short amount of time and thought, okay, next book, train book. I want to do a train book really, really bad. And when you think about train books, you think about Murder on the Orient Express. Like it is like what you said, the crown jewel of like train books. You can't get any better than that. And it's a revenge story. And so I liked the idea of having a revenge story set on a train where it was a bit of the flip side of Murder on the Orient Express, where instead of everyone being guilty and getting revenge on one person, it was one person getting revenge on all the other passengers.
Oh, that's so cool. I never thought of it that way, but yet in that Murder on the Orient Express, it's like everyone all on one person. This is very much flipped. Sorry, go ahead. I love that.
Yeah, and so I'm like, that's a great idea. But the idea of just having it be her just kind of going John Wick on this entire train full of people and killing them all one by one seemed pretty unsatisfying character-wise. And so I thought, what can I do to make it different? And that's when I latched onto the idea of, oh, and then there were none. And she's in this really strange position of having to save these people that she actively despises. And that I thought that's a really cool character that I would like to explore.
That's great. Well, and what I also love, by the way, because you referenced that Mission Impossible train sequence, I actually watched every single Mission Impossible movie recently in preparation for the latest one that came out, which was really fun and interesting to watch them in quick succession. And I believe it's the Orient Express that is the actual train that's in the sequence, which is itself as a reference to Agatha Christie. So I love that you're sort of coming back around. It's circling back on itself, that then you're inspired by that and then thinking about Murder on the Orient Express and, hooray for trains and just train action sequences, train murder mysteries. They're just a lot of fun as a setting.
Yeah, everyone loves trains, and trains are really, really cool, except when it's modern day trains. One of the reasons I said it in the past was because I just felt that if it were like on Amtrak, it would be a really sad, depressing setting. And I wanted glamour. I wanted this mid-century elegance to the proceedings.
That's so funny. Okay, I was going to ask you about that a little later, but since you brought it up, I mean, you have written period before. I mean, you actually wrote a book in 2014, I believe, under a different pseudonym, which was set in the 19th century after the Civil War. So it's not like this is totally out of left field for you, but I was wondering that since you would have also had to get around the usual cell phone and internet issues in some way if you had set it modern day. But I know that it was a challenge since you have the train doing things that trains of 1954 couldn't necessarily do. So it was really more of an ambiance and sort of setting kind of an issue. That was the main motivation in terms of making a period.
It was a little bit of everything because I do try to avoid as much as possible modern technology because it is just the bane of every thriller writer's existence.
Yeah.
Like, it's great in the real life when, I can just grab my phone and call for help or get an Uber or look this up. And it's easy, but in order to keep the suspense going, you can't have any of that. So there was that. And I did want to have a more glamorous setting. And also, it was a bit of a nod to, and this is where it gets kind of out there, and I start talking about this on tour and in interviews, and people go, "What?" But it's a bit of an homage to White Christmas, which
Huh.
I love the movie. It's such cheese. It's such wonderful holiday cheese. And it came out in 1954, and early on in the movie, they take a train from Florida to Vermont. And they hop on this train, and the conductor says, "Sorry, fellas, this train is fully booked. There's no room, but you can wait up in the club car all night." And so they do, but you never see any other people on this allegedly packed train. And so that got me thinking about, like, okay, I want this to be on a mostly empty train. And 1954 sounds as good a time as any to make that the time period. And then when I was going back into what happened to her family and who did this and why, then I could incorporate World War II.
Right. Right. That makes sense. I mean, hey, sometimes it's just like those personal references that are the ones that inspire you most, even though they don't end up lining up tonally. I can see why people were like, White Christmas, huh? Yeah.
What does this Revenge Train book have to do with White Christmas?
Have to do with White Christmas.
But it does.
And I was going to mention that because I think one of the most interesting differences between your train mystery and Murder on the Orient Express is that Christie in Murder on the Orient Express has to isolate that sleeping car on the train. And she does it very cleverly so that we can disregard everyone else who's on that train, because there are a lot of other people on that very long train that get snowed in, right? But the car is actually cut off. So we're only dealing with the people who are sleeping in that car. But you do something very different, which is rather than isolating a single car or two on a long train, you make it so that our cast of characters are the only people on the train. And there's even this wonderful fake out, which is sort of a great way of showing early on in the story the lengths to which Anna Matheson will go to get her revenge. People are on the train when these 6 passengers get on, but then they have been paid to leave, and also even people working on the train. So it seems when they're lured onto the train that this is going to be perhaps a normal train ride, but then once the train goes, they realize, there's no one here, and it is entirely empty, and you have the eeriness of one of these empty trains. So that's very different. So I just wanted to point that out. And I do think that it was sort of an ingenious twist on that, to just these very few people, to put them on this empty train, many, many cars worth. And you really do get to go into the different cars of the train then, unlike in Murder on the Orient Express, which really has the claustrophobia of they cannot go anywhere. We are roving around this train over the course of the novel.
Oh, yeah. Like, I wanted to use pretty much every square inch of that train. And I knew I couldn't do that if it was full of other passengers. And so I did have to come up with, what's the best way to make this train empty? And the first thing that popped in my head was, oh, yeah, she bought all the tickets and she paid the staff to just leave. Everyone but the actual engineer driving the train. And it just showed, I think, the depths of her plan. Like, she planned this thing out to a T. And then when things go sideways, it was just interesting to me to see how she could handle the sudden change in her plan.
Yes.
And
yeah. Yeah,
I
no,
wanted just to show like how like she is hell bent on vengeance.
and that's, this comes up in Christie too, that there are some murderers who plan in advance. Not, not that this is a situation vis-a-vis Anna specifically, but there are some murderers who plan well in advance and have kind of figured out every variable. And then there are others who do it on the spur of the moment and who have to act quickly and their brains are nimble. And you're kind of doing both with her because you're making it clear that she is someone who has been thinking this out for a long time, but then she's placed in this pressure cooker of a situation where things are constantly changing and the peril is imminent. And, that obviously makes for the propulsiveness of the story. Well, I am going to go out on a limb here and guess that you are an Agatha Christie fan. I like to ask my guests on this podcast about what I've come to call their Christie origin story, by which I simply mean, how did you first come to Christie and what did she come to mean to you?
Mine was, I think I was in either 6th or 7th grade. And my sister who's 3 years older than me, was reading for class. And then there were none. And I saw the cover sitting there in the living room. I'm like, what is this? And she told me the plot. And I went, looks like this exists. This plot's, wow. May I read this when you're done with it for class? And she said, yeah, sure. And I read it and it just blew my young mind because I'd never encountered anything like that before. And I'm probably wrong about this, but I do cite that book as maybe the first psychological thriller. In a way. I mean, there've obviously been mysteries and manor houses and vicarages and all that kind of thing. But this one was a mystery, but there was also this real element of like psychological terror.
Yes.
and so I credit her with inventing this genre that has been so good to so many present day writers, including myself. That was my gateway book, basically.
That was you started out with a bang. So that was your gateway book into Christie. Do you have a favorite Christie novel? Is it?
It would be, and then there were none still to this day. Yeah. It was the first one. It was so special to me. And then I went on a several-year kick of just reading so many of her books. I didn't read all of them because, my God, she's written so many. But I think I read about half of them. It helped that my mom was an Agatha Christie fan. So a lot of the books were already in the house. And then those that I were really interested in, I would just go to the local library.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been, I think, a commonality in a lot of people's origin stories too, is that, well, it was around. She's so ubiquitous that it's like your sister was reading her in class. Your mom had copies of her. Like they're these books as physical objects, especially for all of us of a certain age. I guess nowadays people maybe are discovering her on Kindles or as audiobooks, but she was just there. Those books were just there. And if you were an avid reader, you were bound to come across her sooner or later. So I really love that. But I love also what you said about, and then there were none, as potentially the first psychological thriller, because that actually leads me perfectly into my next question, which was going to be about the subgenre that you write, because I think it's an interesting question and it's a tricky question for a lot of writers. I think you're no exception to that. This book, I would say, really is different from a lot of your other Riley Sager titles in that it's period and it doesn't really have any or as many horror-ish elements to it, which some of your other books do. And I know that you've said before that you don't really think of yourself as a quote unquote horror writer, but rather as a writer of psychological thrillers who makes use of horror. And I'm just curious how you personally categorize your books, because I do think categorization can be so tortured and tricky in the mystery genre in particular. Obviously, you write thrillers, but you also obviously delight in laying down clues for your readers and giving them the ability to anticipate your twists, so that they'll get what I call the palm to forehead moment when the reader says, how could I not have seen that? No one does that better than Agatha Christie. And With a Vengeance alone, I was able to spot 3 independent clues. I'm sure there are more. And to be clear, I didn't solve anything with these clues. I just realized after the fact that the clues had been there, all of them rewarding close reading. And one of them even struck me as being particularly golden agey. I won't be more specific because I don't want to spoil anything, but My point is that this sort of a game is a very Christie-ish thing to do. And you've spoken before about how you like to play mind games with your readers using 3 different layers of deception, each layer getting more devious and more difficult to decipher. So I think you could easily make the argument that your books belong more squarely actually within the whodunit or fair play mystery subgenre, even though no one would call them whodunits, rather than the thriller subgenre, since the twists in most modern day thrillers aren't really guessable and don't tend to involve these sorts of games. I'm just curious where you see your books fitting in along this spectrum.
Oh, that's a very good question. I honestly don't think about it all that much when I'm writing something. I know it's more of a marketing
Mm-hmm.
thing that they very much care about it, the
Yes.
marketing team at my publisher. But I am a bit of a hybrid of I am a bit mystery, I am a bit thriller, and I am a teeny bit horror. Usually I just say like I write scary books for people who don't like to be scared. I'm horror light, LITE in air quotes or something.
Right, right.
One reader once said to me that I'm R.L. Stein for adults, and I loved that comparison.
Yeah, I know exactly what they meant by that. It's a very complimentary comparison too.
Oh
Um,
yeah. I was riding high for hours after that. I'm like, really? You think so? Oh my gosh.
Well, because there's an
Like,
accessibility, right? There's an accessibility to those R.L. Stein books where, like, kids, pretty much any kid who likes to read can read those. You don't have to be a hardcore Stephen King horror person to appreciate those books, right?
yeah, and I don't want to be too heavy handed with the scariness. I want my books to be fun, or as much fun as a book can be when it involves horrible things happening to people. But I feel like there should be some pleasure in the reading of it. And so I shy away from the existential terror that a lot of horror books occupy. Like, I do read some horror. I know some horror writers. I'm friends with them. For example, like my friend Clay McLeod Chapman, he's the nicest person on earth. He's so joyful, and he writes books that are so messed up that they're just disturbing as all get out. And I read one of his books and go like, "What is wrong with you?" But I know nothing is wrong with him. But it just so I try to shy away from that kind of thing. So I always aim for some sense of fun, even if the subject matter isn't necessarily fun.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, existential terror abounds in And Then There Were None, right? I mean, Agatha Christie is not someone who I think readers associate generally with existential terror. And that's why that book really is an outlier. It's not very representative of typical Christie content, but that sort of a story can go, hand in hand with a lot of the mystery tropes, the cozier, quote unquote, cozier mystery tropes that she's known for. And it struck me reading with a vengeance that I'm not surprised that you are marketed as a thriller writer, because I think tonally and pacing wise, like it totally fits within the thriller genre. But then what I really appreciated is that you are taking the care to do some cluing, to actually give the reader some agency should they want to use it, to figure out what the heck is going on before you tell the reader what's going on. And most thrillers, or I shouldn't say most thrillers, but a lot of popular thrillers don't do that. And I don't know if you always do that. And maybe since With a Vengeance, in that it has this train setting and its period and it feels like more of an Agatha Christie book, maybe you're doing a little bit more of that. But I appreciated the dual nature of this novel.
Oh, thank you. I try really hard to play fair with the readers because as a reader myself, I really don't like it when you get to this twist and you're like, no, there's no possible way we could have seen this coming. And so I always try to, even if it's buried very, very deeply,
Mm-hmm.
to give a hint of what is coming that maybe some eagle eye readers will figure out ahead of time, but usually not. And then, not that I expect my books to be reread, but if they go back and reread them, they will see, oh, here, yes, now I get it. This and this and this leads up to this. And so it is something I work very hard to try to play fair. And it's interesting because I do have readers say, like, you didn't play fair. And that's just because, like, they missed certain things that maybe I buried them too deeply that no one could see them, but they're there, I swear.
Yeah, I mean, it rewards close reading, and that is the province of the whodunit or the fair play mystery, right? And like, I really love that you have those elements in your very thriller-like mysteries. You know, you're very popular and for the most part contemporary thrillers. I really appreciate that, and I think other mystery readers out there will appreciate that. So I just wanted to highlight that element of your books for everyone. Don't touch that dial. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of our episode. We just wanted to take a moment to ask you, our dear listeners, for a favor.
If you haven't already done so, we would very much appreciate it if you take a moment to, give us a rating or a review wherever you're listening to this podcast.
It really helps the podcast out because ratings and reviews make it much easier for other Christie fans such as yourselves to find our podcast.
And the more ratings and reviews we get, the more people we can reach.
It should take you a matter of seconds, and lucky you, we're going to provide you with those seconds right now, so go to it.
Thank you so much. And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming.
I also wanted to get a little bit more into the weeds of the "And Then There Were None" and "Murder on the Orient Express" references in your book, because that is just what we do here on this podcast. We get into the weeds as to Agatha Christie whenever possible. So bear with me a second, but my first little reference here has to do with the phrase "lifeless fingers." And I don't want to be too specific about this, but at some point in your book, a character who has just died is described as having lifeless fingers. And I underline this phrase immediately because a point of contention in Agatha Christie's "And Then There Were None," which my late co-host, Catherine Brobeck, and I covered while we were reviewing that novel, is the use of the word lifeless, which, as it turns out, need not be taken literally. Lifeless can mean seemingly lifeless. It does not have to be literally lifeless. So at one point, Christie refers to a lifeless hand, and the hand in question belongs to someone who is not in fact dead at the time. He is simply playing dead. And again, without being too specific, I don't want to spoil anything. You may be playing a similar game at one point in your book. So I wondered if your use of the word lifeless was deliberate, and if so, whether it was a direct reference to Christie's use of the word in "And Then There Were None," or am I just that rare reader who is reading too closely?
You were reading too closely in that instance, but I think what you're referring to, the character's name, is a reference to "And Then There Were None."
Yes, absolutely. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad that I am just that close of a reader, but you do it the same way. I think you're really using it the same way, and that's very tricky and clever of you. I also really liked how the snowstorm swirling around the train is used as a threat because it's snowing over the course of this train ride. And the threat never truly comes to pass. I mean, the snow certainly makes matters more difficult in the third act of the story, but it doesn't function the same way that it does in "Murder on the Orient Express," where it outright blocks the train on the tracks. I felt like you were playing with that expectation, though, for the entire book. Is that fair?
Yes. A large part of the planning process of this book was figuring out where I wanted to go with certain things, like how much do I want to, because I know when you talk about, like, you think about "Murder on the Orient Express and you think about train books, there are certain expectations. And so I had to choose, like, which ones do I want to really lean into and which ones do I just want to maybe make a quick feint that it might be doing that or going there. And so that was fun. And so the snow was definitely one of those elements where I'm of the school of, like, more is more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried to get as much atmosphere into this book as possible. And so I'm like, yeah, of course, this train is going to be going through a blizzard.
Yeah, No, yeah, you know what? I love more is more. I talk about that a lot actually on this podcast. There's a lot of more is more in Christie, and I think it adds to it. And why not? Right? Why not? Why should
Exactly. Why not? I think reading should be enjoyable. And I think that excess in a book is enjoyable. And even a little bit of heightened reality, like I forget if it might have been the Washington Post review. Like they liked it, but they called the whole setup like preposterous. And I'm like, yes, it is absolutely preposterous. And that's
Right.
why I love it so.
Yeah, yeah. There's nothing wrong with a preposterous setup. Yeah.
Nothing at all.
I mean, hey, you just said that Bullet Train was one of your inspirations. So, my God, you reeled it in.
Exactly. I did. Yeah.
And then, so this isn't a spoiler since it's really backstory, but I just have to mention that when Anna's father is stabbed in prison, I mentioned that he was killed in this prison vigilante style. He is stabbed 37 times, once for every person killed in the explosion. Love that little Murder on the Orient Express Easter egg. Thank you for that. And then finally, the character of Dante Wentworth. I won't go into who he is. Read the book if you're curious. But he's young and handsome and careless and charming. And to me, he was very Philip Lombard from And Then There Were None. And it felt to me like whenever you were playing around with the will they, won't they of Anna and Dante, because you do play around with that. They have their own romantic backstory. It felt like you were in some way referencing the chemistry between Vera Claythorne and Philip Lombard, and Then There Were None, which is something that Christie herself played with, since she altered that incredibly bleak ending of her novel when she adapted it herself for the theater, and she actually allowed Vera and Philip to survive and to live more or less happily ever after. Were you thinking at all about them while you were writing those two characters, in particular their relation to each other?
I really wasn't. With Dante's character, because he is a figure from Anna's past. Well, most of these people on the train are. Like he's like particularly an interesting figure from her past. And I wanted there to be someone on that train who represented who she used to be before all of this happened. And to really give her a sense, and the reader a sense of like how much she's changed and everything she's lost. And so he was sort of like the ghost of Anna's past and possibly her future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For anyone who's steeped in And Then There Were None, you just go to them because they're the only two that do have any sort of life outside of that island, that claustrophobic island. And there's a little bit of a similar thing going on here, right? Where it's like, is this maybe going to, and I won't say how the book ends, but I just thought that was really interesting and I appreciated that. I would like to ask you a variation on a question that I'm sure you get asked a lot. This is ye old pantser versus plotter question. You have said in one interview that I read, this is the great thing about, the age of the internet. I just get to go and Google you and then read all sorts of things you've already said and hold you to account in my interview. But you said, I go back and forth between being a detailed outliner and simply winging it. I used to outline religiously, but now it varies with each book. And then somewhere else, I read that you changed who the culprit was in this novel while you were writing it, which is actually a very Christie thing to do. She was much more fast and loose with her plots than people realize, especially given how concept-driven they might appear to be. So what exactly was the process like in terms of writing with a vengeance? How much did you plan? How much did you wing it? I would just love to hear a little bit about that.
I really wanted to wing it. I tried so hard to wing it. But when you're dealing with the train, the train aspect, the logistics of it all really threw me for a loop, because I thought, hey, train book, it will be fun. And it was fun, but it was also so dang difficult because it's a train. It's just all these connected cars. And I have a killer moving around, going back and up and down this train, and I have people moving around this train. And so I had to keep track of everyone, but I also had to make sure that none of them were seeing the killer. And I needed to make clear to the reader, like, who was where at what particular time at all times. And the logistics just overwhelmed me. And so I eventually had to outline and really, I guess it's almost storyboarding what I do, because I will write things down on index cards and then rearrange them on the floor of my office to see the best position for things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I ultimately ended up doing with this book, because the logistics of it all just threw me for a major loop. And when that happens, and it happened, and definitely in this case, like, it just didn't click as well as it should have with who the killer was and what the motives were. So in the revisions process, I switched it up and realized that there was another character that I'm like, oh, yes, it's this person. It should have been this person all along, of course.
Did that require a ton of rewriting or not so much at that point?
It was a fair amount of rewriting. Luckily, I've gotten pretty good at knowing how to handle that. Like, because I'm on a book a year schedule, we know where I need to be at any given point in the year. Like, okay, you need to have this done. You need to have this done. Okay, this draft has to be finished. And so I know, like, how long it will take me to do some extensive revisions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to just buckle down and get it revised. And it was, it's a much better book than that initial first draft I handed into my editor, by far.
Yeah, I mean, I completely understand that. I don't know how some people can write these intricate mysteries without really outlining or, giving themselves much of a framework. I recently had on Lucy Foley, actually, and she writes bits and pieces out of order, just like all over the place. She said she's a chaotic writer. I think she said she was a chaotic person, and she brings that to her writing, and she just kind of freestyles it. And I was like, wow, that is bold. I don't know if I would be able to sit down and start typing, because I would just not necessarily have the confidence. But yeah, there is something nice about having that freedom, but it comes at the cost of the risk of having to do a lot of revising. Anyway, I'm always just interested to ask people about their process. So I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you about the 3 books that you published under your own name, which is Todd Ritter. Again, Riley Sager is a pseudonym. So you published 3 books as Todd Ritter in 2010, 2011, and 2013. And these were also mysteries. It was a 3-book series that followed a small town police chief as she investigates various murders and disappearances. And then in 2014, you also published that book I already mentioned, the post-Civil War historical mystery, also a mystery, under the pseudonym of Alan Finn. What was it that led you to start using the Riley Sager pen name starting in 2017? Do you see the Riley Sager books as distinct in terms of subgenre from your Todd Ritter and your Alan Finn output? Just what's the story behind Riley Sager?
Oh, the story behind Riley. Yeah, I published under my real name 3 books, and the sales were, what's a polite way to put it, abysmal. And so, because it's a tough industry. And also, I really don't think that these were very good books. I was still learning how to be a writer at the time, and I haven't gone back and read them. I'm sure if I did, I'd be horrified. And so there was a lot to learn about my writing, about the industry, and it just wasn't the best time at all for me to be doing any of this, I think. And so I was unprepared for anything, basically. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that it was going to have to be like, okay, this has been a bad experience, but it's a learning experience. And so I'll regroup and try my hand at something else. So I tried this supernatural thriller under a pen name at the advice of my agent. And that was even worse of an experience. That one was a heartbreaker, because I love that book. And I was planning like a whole series about it. And publishing is weird, publishing is brutal, and they kind of just sabotaged everything regarding that book. And so I found myself at square one yet again.
That was the Alan Finn book.
Yeah. people are like, why don't you talk about that? I'm like, oh, because it was my worst experience ever. To write this thing that I loved, and I loved working in like historical fiction and the time period and the setting, and there was supernatural. And to just have it all basically ripped away from me was just really tough to handle. And so I was at the end of my writing career, and I had an idea. I wrote a 1-page synopsis, sent it to my agent, and she just said, write this, write it right now. I don't know if, is swearing allowed
Yes, swearing is
on this? Okay.
more than allowed.
Her actual words were, write the fucking shit out of it, which is the best advice I've ever received from anyone in my life. And so I did. And the book was called Final Girls. And she read it and said, this could be a big book. This is a really good book. We should use a pen name. And I said, no, I'm so proud of this book. I want my name to be on it. And again, she gave me such amazing advice where she said, every editor I send this book to will look up your previous sales, which have been horrible, and they will either not make an offer or they'll make you a terrible offer, slap a terrible cover on it, dump it with no publicity, and you'll be exactly where you started. And this book deserves more than that, and I know that you know that. And I couldn't argue with that at all. And so for the sake of the book, I was like, grudgingly, I'm like, okay, I'll do a pen name.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, think of, maybe initials or a family name or something. And so Sager is my grandmother's maiden name.
Mm-hmm.
And Riley came from, I wanted to use initials, and my parents are named Ray and Linda. And so I was going to use RL and be RL Sager. And that was a great idea for like all of 30 seconds before I realized that R.L. Stein kind of has the market cornered on those initials.
I just got there right before you said it. I was like, why wouldn't that work? Oh, right.
Yeah. And when I say this like at book events, like I'll say like R.L. Sager, and like half the audience will just start going, oh no, you couldn't. I'm like, nope, you couldn't. And so I looked up like, popular baby names. And Riley was like on the list for both male and female. I'm like, okay, this is a popular name. R.L.'s Riley, sort of. And so that's what happened. And so that's how I became to be publishing under Riley Sager without knowing at all. Clearly, there's no clue that like it would become this thing, that I would become this international bestseller. Like that's, to me, still like 9 books later, that's something I still can't wrap my head around.
That's a great story. I mean, it's inspiring, honestly, because you had a rocky beginning, right? And it sounds like 2 false, I shouldn't say false starts, but 2 forays that didn't necessarily work out. And then on the third one,
that
as
third
Riley
one
Sager,
was the charm. Oh yeah. And sometimes I bristle because I'm like, oh, do I really have to talk about the pen name again? But then I think like, yes, I should talk about the pen name because you're right. It is inspirational. And I enjoy being this author who's had great success, who can say like to other authors who might be struggling right now, like it's possible. It might not come out the way you think it will. It might not be under your name, but it is possible. Keep going.
That is a triumphant story. So then I take it you have no plans to go back to the Todd Ritter or Alan Finn.
No. And people ask me that, and I'm like, I would literally be losing money. Like it's just be like my sales are like, I put it in like, because I always appreciate like being given data. So I try to provide some. And so like my literal best week of sales under my real name was best week for a book was 210 copies. That was my best week ever. I've not had a Riley Sager book sell under 210 copies any week for 9 years. So like I'm still like my worst week as Riley Sager is still better than my best week. So like I can't, when you have that kind of numbers going on, you can't go back.
I think you need to stick with that pseudonym. Yeah, the power of the pen name. That's really cool. That's great. That's great. just back to With a Vengeance for a second. I was so glad to see that you have been referencing the television show Revenge while talking about this book. I know that you at least referenced it in one place. For the uninitiated, especially, there are a lot of global listeners to this podcast, but that was a show that aired from 2011 to 2015. It also had a female protagonist who was out for revenge. It was actually inspired by The Count of Monte Cristo, which is, the ultimate revenge tale, the sort of OG revenge tale. And then you also referenced the following movies as ones that influenced Anna herself to come up with her scheme: Strangers on a Train, The Narrow Margin, and The Lady Vanishes. I absolutely love the first and the third of those movies. I'm actually embarrassed to say that I have never seen The Narrow Margin, so I'm going to have to. But beyond Christie and White Christmas, what would you say, are there any other major influences for you while you were writing this story? I'm just curious.
Well, one that I forgot to mention, because I did this big Instagram post of like, these are the movies that inspired the book, and these are the books that inspired the book. And all of them, I forgot to mention Clue. Because I think the movie Clue does take place in 1954, if I'm not mistaken. There is a bit of Clue in all of this. And I did, and to help me keep track of all the characters, is I did think of the train as a clue board. Each car was its own room.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just moving these pieces around. And you strike me as a very observant person. So I think that you might have seen this, that I make sure to say what color everyone is wearing.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because they are really pieces. They're just these colored pieces moving around this train-shaped clue board.
And perhaps colors of clothing even figure in as clues, even beyond the reference to Clue. I mean, I think there's something very meta going on there. Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's really great. I also know that you have a dream actor who you would love to play your protagonist, Anna Matheson. Can you share who that is?
Oh, Florence Pugh. Like, normally, because I always, not always, but I do try to picture some actor or actress that I really like as the main character, and it helps me with the writing of it, because I sort of use them as a model for the character or their tone or whatnot. And normally that is Emma Stone, because she's just one of the most talented human beings on earth.
Sure.
And for this one, I just could not get Florence Pugh out of my head, because she's so kick-ass, yet also has this vulnerability. And I wanted Anna to be the same way. I wanted her to be deeply vulnerable, yet also able to handle herself in almost any situation.
Yeah, it's the intensity and the vulnerability. She can just do both, like practically at the same time, which is
it's amazing.
Which is very Anna, and that's very Anna. I mean, she's Florence Pugh is sensational. Have you gotten anywhere in terms of getting the book into her hands?
I've tried through my film and TV agents. I don't know how successful they have been, but that was very early on. Like, the book still wasn't quite edited fully, so it was not quite the end result, but it was close enough that I sent it to them and I said, please get this into the hands of Florence Pugh somehow if you can.
I know that you like to focus on your books and sort of let the Hollywood side of things percolate and do their thing, since it's such a volatile business. And speaking somewhat from experience out here in Los Angeles, that is such a healthy thing to do. I think that's more than fair enough. But I'm just curious, especially given that you have these 9 titles now, and so many of them really do feel cinematic and big. I'm just curious whether you can report anything on the adaptational horizon for any of your work. If not, totally get it, but I had to ask.
I don't know how much I can say. There are 3 that are in active development, some more active than others. And one, I think we're actually pretty close to it maybe possibly happening. I'm pessimistic by nature. And I've had too many times with Hollywood in the past 9 years where I think something's going to happen and then it doesn't. So I'm very cynical. I'm like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. So fingers crossed it actually happens. But as you said, like I stay far, far away from all of that because I value my sanity.
Yeah. Cynicism is, I think, a smart way to go about one's life in general, but in particular as to Hollywood, or else you'll just go crazy. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I will be looking out, and I have to imagine it's only a matter of time before at least one, if not many, of these books makes its way onto a small or a big screen. I also have to ask, what are you working on next? I assume we're going to get our Riley Sager for 2026. I mean, you've set up a sausage factory here, just like Agatha Christie did. She would talk about, as soon as you snip off one sausage, she's got to start making the next. So are you mid sausage at the moment?
I am. I'm literally like mid sausage right now. Yeah, because this is not my first rodeo now with this, and I've worked with the same editor I've had since Final Girls. We do know like what the schedule should be, and so I start a book every January 2nd without fail, and I know that I have to have a finished, approved by my editor version sent off to the copy editor by Christmas. And my editor has said, like, it doesn't matter how we get there, just as long as we get there. And so at this stage, I do know, like, okay, yep, it's July, so now it's time. We're in the home stretch.
Right.
And so I never have really a summer because my books come out in June and there's always publicity and touring. And then July and August is always reserved for finishing the dang book.
Wow.
And then I can, in September, kind of breathe a sigh of relief and do revisions, and hopefully they're not too brutal, and then hopefully enjoy, Halloween through Christmas.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like autumn and winter then are really, that's your time to shine, where you can like just breathe a little more easily.
Yes, I'm very much an autumn person because it means my book is mostly done and I can just kick back and read for pleasure, because I really don't do that when I'm writing, because I'm always afraid of, one, accidentally like getting another author's voice in my head.
Yep.
Or also reading something so amazing that it makes what I do look so awful.
That it'll demoralize you. I mean, my God, I can really relate to that. I have that happen to me quite often when I'm reading something. Just like, what's the point?
Yes, you read something that's incredible, and then you sit down to write, and you're like, oh, I suck.
You're like, this is just garbage.
So much.
I think that humility speaks well of you. That's really great. All right. Well, I can't wait for the Riley Sager of 2026. And I just have one final question for you. And I know that you already identified And Then There Were None as your favorite Christie title. So I'm really not sure how you're going to answer this, but I do have to ask almost everyone on this podcast, on this Agatha Christie Adult podcast, what for many people is a tortured question. And that is, if you had a gun to your head, who would you choose, Poirot or Marple, and why?
Oh, that's a very good one. I think Marple.
Interesting.
Because she's so unassuming, and she's smart as hell, but she's not as imposing as Poirot, and also not as insufferable as Poirot. Yeah, I would choose Marple.
I'm the Marplite of this podcast. My late co-host was the Poirotian. So I love that answer. I could go on about Miss Marple all day, and I have, but that certainly works for me. And I just want to thank you, Riley, for coming onto the podcast and for all of the work that you have done, because I think there's so much joy to be had reading through these 9 titles. And like I said, yes, they are thrillers, but they also really do have significant elements of fair play and, what might fall a little bit more under the whodunit umbrella than I think people would guess from the packaging, actually, from the packaging and the marketing of your book. So I just really want to highlight that, especially for listeners of this podcast, and just thank you again for your time and wish you all the best as you continue to write away.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you again to Riley Sager. I'm so thrilled I got the opportunity to speak with him. I've put a link to his website in my show notes should you be interested in checking him or his work out, if you aren't already familiar with it. For next week's episode, I am returning to the world of YA mystery. I am going to have on the podcast the YA mystery author Martha Jocelyn, who is the author of the Aggie Morton Mystery Queen series. These books are so charming. I can't wait to share them with you. So that will be my next episode. And should you want any bonus content, over on Patreon, I have just reviewed Travels with Agatha Christie and Sir David Suchet. This was an original 5-episode BritBox documentary in which David Suchet follows in the footsteps of Agatha Christie's 1922 round-the-world grand tour. It's a lovely program. There are a few friends of the podcast who even appear in it. So I had a lot of fun watching that and reviewing it. You can check it out on Patreon. There is a link in the show notes. You can find the podcast on Instagram at All About Agatha, and you can find me at my author website, KemperDonovan.com. I've provided links to Instagram and my website and the first 2 novels in my Ghostwriter Mysteries series. All of that is in the show notes for you. And please give the show a rating and or a review if you haven't yet done so. I would greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. Bye.